What happens when arrogance meets hidden genius? In a world where we're so often judged by our uniforms, our job titles, and the balance in our bank accounts, one powerful man believed he was untouchable. He sat in one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, shrouded in the wealth and power that made him a titan of industry. Across from him stood a simple waitress, someone he considered invisible, insignificant. To amuse his friends, he decided to mock her in a language he was sure she wouldn't understand. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated her. He had no idea who she really was, where she came from, or the power she secretly held. What she said next, in perfect fluent German, didn't just silence him. It set in motion a chain of events that would shatter his world and change both of their lives forever. The air in Aurelia, a Michelin-starred restaurant nestled in the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side, was thick with the scent of truffle oil, old money, and unspoken power dynamics. For Isabella Rossi, it was the smell of survival. Each night she navigated the labyrinth of linen-draped tables, her movements a practiced ballet of efficiency and invisibility. Her uniform, a simple but elegant black dress with a starched white apron, was a costume. It concealed the woman who, just 2 years ago, had been fluent in 3 languages, held a degree in mechanical engineering, and was the heir apparent to a multi-million-dollar technology firm. Tonight, the weight of her double life felt heavier than usual. The tips from the last few weeks had barely covered the rent on her tiny Brooklyn apartment, let alone the ever-growing pile of medical bills for her younger sister Chloe. Chloe's experimental treatment was a ravenous beast devouring every dollar Isabella earned, and then some. So she smiled. She poured $1,000 bottles of Chateau Lafite with a steady hand. She described the amuse-bouche with the poetic flair of a chef, and she ignored the casual cruelty of the city's elite. Her station tonight included Table 7, the most coveted alcove in the restaurant, with a panoramic view of the city lights. It was currently occupied by Conrad Sterling. Even if you didn't know his name, you knew his type. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, his watch a Patek Philippe that cost more than Isabella's annual salary, and his aura screamed a specific kind of new money arrogance. Sterling had clawed his way to the top of the tech world with his company Sterling Dynamics, a ruthless behemoth known for its hostile takeovers of smaller, struggling firms. He was flanked by 2 associates, Philip and Dmitri men, whose expressions were a carefully curated mix of admiration and fear. From the moment they sat down, they were difficult. Sterling snapped his fingers to get her attention, a gesture that made Isabella's teeth ache. He sent back the water because the lemon slice was, in his words, insufficiently wedged. He quizzed her on the provenance of the beluga caviar with the condescending air of a professor testing a failing student. Isabella answered every question with placid professionalism. She had dealt with men like him before. They saw her apron, not the person wearing it. They saw a servant, not a peer. This assumption was their weakness and her shield. "We'll start with the 82 Petrus," Sterling announced, not looking at her but at his menu, "and make sure it's decanted properly. I can taste impatience." "Of course," Sir Isabella replied, her voice even. She retrieved the bottle from the cellar, her hands treating the dusty glass with a reverence she didn't feel. The wine alone was worth 3 months of Chloe's medication. As she began the decanting process at the tableside cart, the men's conversation, a low hum of business jargon and braggadocio, continued. "The Rossi Innovations deal is almost closed," Dmitri said, his voice slick with sycophancy. "The board is folding." They have no choice. Isabella's blood ran cold. Rossi Innovations, her father's company, her legacy, the company that had been ripped from her family after her father's sudden death and a subsequent vicious corporate raid, had left them bankrupt. She'd heard rumors that Sterling Dynamics was the final bidder, the vulture circling the carcass of her family's life's work. Now hearing it confirmed a cold, hard knot formed in her stomach. She kept her expression neutral, her hand steady as she poured the ruby-red liquid into the crystal decanter. She was a ghost at this table, privy to the autopsy of her own past. It was a pathetic little company, really, Sterling scoffed, swirling his now full glass. Old-world tech run by a dreamer, not a businessman. But there's one piece of code, one patent buried in their portfolio that's worth a fortune. We'll strip it for parts and burn the rest. He laughed, a short barking sound devoid of humor. Philip and Dimitri joined in a chorus of obedient hyenas. Isabella felt a tremor in her hand and willed it to stop. A dreamer. Her father, Leonardo Rossi, had been a brilliant inventor, a man who saw technology as a way to build a better future, not just a fatter portfolio. He had poured his heart and soul into Rossi Innovations. This man, Conrad Sterling, was dancing on his grave and ordering expensive wine to celebrate. She finished her task, placed the glasses, and gave a slight bow. "Will you be ready to order, or would you like a few more moments?" Sterling didn't even look up. He waved a dismissive hand. "We'll let you know when we require your services." As Isabella retreated to the shadows of the service station, the cold knot in her stomach began to burn. It was no longer just about survival, about Chloe's bills, about getting through another demeaning shift. It was personal. The man who had destroyed her family was sitting 10 feet away, and he had absolutely no idea who she was. The night was far from over. The meal progressed like a slow-motion car crash. Each course brought a fresh wave of casual disdain from Table 7. Conrad Sterling seemed to derive a unique pleasure from asserting his dominance over the staff. He complained that his steak, a Japanese A5 Wagyu that cost a small fortune, was seared at a temperature that was an insult to the cow. He interrogated Isabella on the specific pH level of the soil where the microgreens in his salad were grown. Isabella fielded each complaint with a serene, almost unnerving calm. Inside a storm was raging. Every dismissive word, every arrogant gesture was a spark landing on the dry tinder of her grief and anger. She thought of her father, a kind, brilliant man who would have engaged the busboy in a conversation about his dreams. She thought of her mother who had passed away years earlier, but had taught her that dignity was the one thing no one could ever take from you. And she thought of Chloe, whose laughter was the only thing that kept the darkness at bay, lying in a hospital bed, her future dependent on the generosity of strangers and the grueling work Isabella was doing right now. The main courses were cleared, and it was time for dessert. Sterling and his companions were growing louder, their confidence buoyed by the ludicrously expensive wine. They had moved on from business to more personal conquests, their conversation a vulgar tapestry of boasts. Isabella approached to take their dessert order, her notepad in hand, maintaining the pleasant, neutral expression that had become her armor. Sterling looked up at her, a smirk playing on his lips. He had been speaking English all night, but now, as if to create an even more exclusive circle of contempt, he turned to Philip and Dimitri and switched to German. "Sehen Sie sich an." He began his German accent, passable, but clearly not native. "Sie hat die Augen einer Kuh. Leer ohne einen einzigen Gedanken dahinter. Look at her. She has the eyes of a cow, empty without a single thought behind them." Dimitri chuckled a greasy, unpleasant sound. "Wahrscheinlich kann sie nicht bis 20 zählen, ohne ihre Schuhe auszuziehen, Conrad. She probably can't count to 20 without taking off her shoes." Conrad. Isabella stood perfectly still. Her mother was from Munich. Isabella had spent every summer of her childhood there speaking German with her grandparents. She was as fluent in German as she was in English, her accent a flawless, educated Bavarian. A slow, cold fire began to creep up her spine, but she kept her face a placid mask. She let them believe she was oblivious. Sterling, emboldened by her lack of reaction, leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked directly at her, yet spoke to his friends. Ich frage mich, was für ein trauriges kleines Leben sie führt. Von einem Gehaltscheck zum nächsten, wahrscheinlich in einer Wohnung, die nach Katzenpisse und zerbrochenen Träumen riecht. I wonder what sad little life she leads. From one paycheck to the next, probably in an apartment that smells of cat piss and broken dreams. Philip added, und diese Uniform, sie ist so deprimierend. Sie schreit geradezu, ich habe im Leben versagt. And that uniform, it's so depressing. It just screams, I have failed at life. Each German word was a perfectly aimed dart. They were dissecting her, mocking her presumed lack of intelligence, her poverty, her very existence, all while she stood before them, notepad in hand, required to serve them. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot pressure behind her eyes. But alongside the humiliation, something else was crystallizing, a cold, diamond-hard resolve. They thought they were speaking in code. They thought she was part of the furniture. They had no idea they were arming her. She let the silence hang for a moment after their laughter subsided. She kept her eyes on her notepad, as if struggling to understand. Then she slowly lifted her gaze, meeting Conrad Sterling's eyes directly for the first time that night. She allowed a small, polite smile to touch her lips. Verzeihung, mein Herr, she said, her voice quiet but clear. I believe you were discussing dessert. She spoke in English, giving him one last chance to retreat from the abyss he was digging for himself. Sterling's smirk widened. He saw her question as a confirmation of his assumptions. He turned back to his friends. Siehst du absolut keine Ahnung, he whispered in German, loud enough for her to hear. So dumm. Es ist fast schon süß. Sie absolutely clueless. So dumb. It's almost cute. He then turned back to Isabella, his eyes glittering with malice. Yes, we'll have the Grand Marnier soufflé. For 3, and another bottle of the Petrus. Don't drop it. It's worth more than you are. An excellent choice, sir, Isabella said, her voice still impossibly even. It takes 25 minutes to prepare. I will put the order in immediately. As she turned and walked away, the men's snickering followed her. She could feel Sterling's eyes on her back, full of smug satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully demonstrated his superiority. He had no idea that he had just handed the keys to his own destruction to the one person in the world who had every reason to use them. The 25 minutes it would take for the soufflé to rise would be more than enough time for her to prepare her response. The waitress was gone. Isabella Rossi was about to re-emerge. The 25 minutes Isabella spent waiting for the soufflés were a period of intense, almost meditative calm. The initial sting of the insults had faded, replaced by a glacial focus. She moved through the kitchen, a chaotic symphony of clanging pans and shouted orders, but she was in her own bubble of silence. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a strategist preparing for a decisive engagement. She was her father's daughter, and her mind, the one thing Sterling had mocked, was now her greatest weapon. When the pastry chef slid the 3 perfectly risen golden-brown soufflés under the heat lamp, Isabella took a deep breath. She placed them on a silver tray, along with 3 spoons and the accompanying crème anglaise in a small pitcher. She checked her reflection in the polished silver. The woman looking back was tired, yes, but her eyes held a fire that had been dormant for too long. She walked back to table 7. The men had fallen into a comfortable wine-fueled lull, their conversation now a low murmur. Sterling was slouched in his chair, the very picture of entitled boredom. He looked up lazily as she approached. Isabella placed the soufflés on the table with practiced grace, one in front of each man. Her movements were deliberate, silent. Then, instead of retreating as she was expected to, she stood her ground at the head of the table. She clasped her hands loosely in front of her. She cleared her throat a soft sound, but it cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. Sterling looked at her annoyed. "Is there something else?" he asked in English. Isabella met his gaze. The polite, vacant smile was gone. Her expression was now one of cool, detached appraisal. And then she spoke. Her German was not the clunky, functional German he had used. It was flawless, aristocratic High German, the kind spoken in lecture halls and boardrooms, flowing from her like a piece of music. Herr Sterling, she began, her voice resonating with an authority that made all three men sit bolt upright. The change was so instantaneous, so shocking, that it was as if an actress had dropped her character mid-scene. "Ich hoffe, der Soufflé ist nach Ihrem Geschmack." She continued, her tone dangerously polite. Obwohl ich bezweifle, dass ein Mann mit einem so unfeinen Gaumen die Feinheiten zu schätzen weiß. "I hope the soufflé is to your liking, although I doubt a man with such an unrefined palate could appreciate its subtleties." Sterling's jaw went slack. His face, flushed with wine, moments before began to pale. Dmitri and Philip stared their spoons, frozen halfway to their desserts, their eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. Isabella didn't pause. She had the floor. Sie haben vorhin die Grammatik falsch verwendet, als Sie versuchten, mich zu beleidigen. Es ist eine häufige Falle für diejenigen, die eine Sprache lernen, um zu beeindrucken, anstatt um zu kommunizieren. "You used incorrect grammar earlier when you were attempting to insult me. It's a common pitfall for those who learn a language to impress rather than to communicate." She took a small step closer, her eyes locked on Sterling. Goethe hat einmal geschrieben, man sieht nur, was man weiß. Sie sehen eine Uniform und eine Dienerin, weil ihr Wissen über die Welt eng und auf den Wert von Dingen beschränkt ist, nicht auf den Wert von Menschen. Sie sehen eine dumme Kuh, weil sie sich weigern, die Möglichkeit von Tiefe in jemandem zu sehen, den sie für unterlegen halten. Goethe once wrote, "You only see what you know. You see a uniform and a servant, because your knowledge of the world is narrow, limited to the price of things, not the value of people. You see a stupid cow, because you refuse to entertain the possibility of depth in anyone you deem beneath you." The restaurant around them seemed to fade away. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of other conversations, it all disappeared into a vacuum of stunned silence at table 7. Isabella's voice dropped, losing its academic tone and taking on a sharp personal edge. Was das traurige kleine Leben betrifft, von dem Sie sprachen? Mein Leben hat vielleicht Schwierigkeiten, Herr Sterling, aber es ist nicht traurig. Traurig ist ein Mann, der seine eigene Unsicherheit verbergen muss, indem er andere herabsetzt. Traurig ist ein Mann, dessen einziger Maßstab für den Wert eines Menschen sein Bankkonto ist. Traurig ist, dass Sie glauben, der Kauf eines Weins, der mehr wert ist, als ich mache Sie zu einem besseren Mann. In Wahrheit macht es Sie nur zu einem Kunden. As for the sad little life you spoke of. My life may have hardship, Mr. Sterling, but it is not sad. Sad is a man who must hide his own insecurity by belittling others. Sad is a man whose only measure of a person's worth is their bank balance. Sad is that you believe purchasing a wine worth more than me makes you a better man. In truth, it just makes you a customer, She let her words hang in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone dropped into a still pond. Conrad Sterling was speechless, utterly, completely, and humiliatingly speechless. The blood had drained from his face, leaving a sickly, mottled pallor. He looked like he had been slapped. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. His associates, Philip and Dmitri, looked anywhere but at him or Isabella, their faces burning with second-hand shame. They were witnessing the public evisceration of their leader. Isabella leaned in slightly, her final words delivered in a near whisper for him alone. Und übrigens, der Name meines Vaters war Leonardo Rossi. Rossi Innovations. Sie tanzen auf dem Grab eines Träumers, Herr Sterling. Und Sie haben keine Ahnung, wie sehr Sie das noch bereuen werden. And by the way, my father's name was Leonardo Rossi. Rossi Innovations. You are dancing on a dreamer's grave, Mr. Sterling. And you have no idea how much you are going to regret that. With that, she straightened up, her composure absolute. She gave a curt, professional nod. Guten Appetit. Enjoy your meal. She turned on her heel and walked away, her back straight, her steps measured. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel the crater she had left behind, the shocked silence that was louder than any explosion. She had just declared war using nothing but her voice and the truth. The game had changed, and she had just made the first move. Isabella didn't go back to the kitchen. She walked directly to the staff changing room, her heart hammering against her ribs, not with fear, but with a wild, exhilarating sense of liberation. The adrenaline was a potent cocktail sharpening her senses. She could hear the frantic, hushed whispers erupting from the dining room in her wake. She had just begun to unfasten her apron when the door swung open. Mr. Henderson, the restaurant manager, stood there, his face a mask of panic and fury. "Rossi, what in God's name did you do?" he hissed, his voice trembling. "Table 7 is Conrad Sterling, the Conrad Sterling. Do you know who he is?" "I have a fairly good idea now," Isabella said, calmly, folding her apron and placing it in her locker. "He's demanding you be fired. Immediately. He said you were insolent, unprofessional. He's threatening to write a review that will ruin us." Henderson was practically vibrating with anxiety. He was a man who lived in fear of bad Yelp reviews and powerful patrons. A man like Sterling was his worst nightmare. "And what did you say to him?" Isabella asked, turning to face him. Henderson wrung his hands. "What could I say? He's a billionaire. You're a waitress, I told him you would be dealt with. I told him you were fired. You need to get your things and leave, now, through the back exit." Isabella had expected this. She felt a pang of disappointment, but no surprise. Mr. Henderson was just another man who saw the uniform, not the person. "Fine," she said. It was a single word devoid of emotion. "Fine, that's all you have to say. You just threw away your job. Mr. Henderson." Isabella said, her voice soft but firm. "Some things are worth more than a job. My dignity is one of them." She turned her back on him, changed out of her uniform into her simple street clothes, and gathered her few belongings. As she walked out the back alley door, the smells of garbage and stale grease replacing the expensive perfumes of the dining room, a wave of cold reality washed over her. The exhilaration began to fade, replaced by the chilling question, what now? She had no job. She had a sister whose life depended on her income. The moral victory felt glorious, but it wouldn't pay for Chloe's next round of treatment. For a moment, panic seized her. Had her pride been a terrible self-indulgent mistake? She leaned against the cold brick wall of the alley, closing her eyes and forcing herself to breathe. No, it was necessary. Her father had always told her, "Never let anyone make you feel small, Isabella." Your mind is your kingdom. Never surrender it. Tonight she had defended her kingdom. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe's nurse. Chloe had a good day. Asked about you. Don't forget the copay for Monday's infusion is due. The message was a splash of icy water. Monday. She had 2 days. Isabella started the long walk to the subway, her mind racing. Rossi Innovations, Conrad Sterling, her father. There had to be a connection, something more than just a name. Sterling had said it himself. One patent buried in their portfolio that's worth a fortune. What patent? Her father had been working on something before he died, something he was secretive about. He called it his legacy project. After his death in the chaotic whirlwind of debt lawsuits and the company's collapse, everything had been a blur. The corporate lawyers had swept in, and she, consumed by grief, had signed whatever they put in front of her. When she got back to her tiny apartment, she didn't sleep. She pulled out a large, dusty footlocker from under her bed, the last remnant of her old life, filled with her father's personal effects. She tore through old notebooks, filled with his elegant cursive and complex schematics photo albums and stacks of letters. For hours she found nothing but memories that made her heart ache. Then, tucked inside a worn, leather-bound copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, she found it. It was a thick envelope sealed with wax bearing the Rossi family crest. Her name was written on the front in her father's hand. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was not a letter, but a series of complex legal documents, and a small handwritten note. My dearest Isabella, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the worst has happened. The sharks are circling. They will try to take everything. Let them have the company, the buildings, the machines. They are just steel and glass. But they cannot have this. This is the soul of the company. This is the future. This is the patent for Project Daedalus. I registered it, not to the company, but to you on your 18th birthday. It is your inheritance, your shield, and your sword. They will think they own the body of Rossi Innovations. But you, my darling girl, hold its heart. Don't ever sell it for money. Sell it only for its true worth. Your loving father, Leonardo. Isabella's breath hitched. She spread the legal documents across her floor. It was all there, the official patent registration for a revolutionary piece of energy recapture technology, something far beyond the scope of anything Rossi Innovations had publicly produced. And the sole owner, the sole signatory, with the power to license or sell it, was listed as Isabella Maria Rossi. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. It was the first genuine smile she'd had in 2 years. Conrad Sterling thought he had bought a carcass to be stripped for parts. He had no idea that the most valuable part, the very heart he was after, was never for sale. It belonged to the waitress he had just humiliated and fired. He hadn't just made an enemy of a random woman. He had made an enemy of the one person on earth who held the key to his entire acquisition. The panic was gone, replaced by the same cold, crystalline focus she'd felt before her reply in the restaurant. Her father had given her a shield and a sword. It was time to learn how to use them. The next 48 hours were a blur of transformation. Isabella Rossi shed the skin of the weary waitress and stepped back into the world she was born to inhabit. The first call she made was at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning to a number she hadn't dialed in over 2 years. Pendleton Finch and Associates, how may I direct your call? A crisp voice answered. Arthur Pendleton, please. Tell him it's Isabella Rossi. There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end of the line, followed by a flurry of muffled activity. Seconds later, a warm, gravelly voice came on. Isabella. My dear girl, is that really you? Arthur Pendleton had been her father's lawyer, his closest friend, and a man who had practically been her uncle growing up. After the collapse, Isabella, overwhelmed and ashamed, had cut off contact with almost everyone from her past. It's me, Arthur, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I need your help. I need a shark. Isabella, he said, his tone shifting from surprise to professional concern. Whatever you need, I'm listening. She spent the next hour explaining everything: the restaurant, Conrad Sterling, and the contents of the envelope. When she finished, there was a long pause. Then Arthur let out a low whistle. Leonardo, you magnificent son of a gun, he murmured. He did it. He actually did it. He secured the one thing that mattered. What is Project Daedalus, Arthur, exactly? It's not just a patent, Isabella. It's a paradigm shift, a system for recapturing and recycling kinetic energy from industrial machinery with over 90% efficiency. Your father thought it could revolutionize manufacturing, transportation, everything. Sterling Dynamics doesn't just want it for their portfolio. Their entire next-generation tech platform is likely based on acquiring it. Without Daedalus, their 10-year growth strategy is dead in the water. They've likely already promised it to their investors. A fierce pride swelled in Isabella's chest. Her father, the dreamer. Sterling doesn't know the patent is mine, Isabella said. He thinks it belongs to the corporate shell he's buying. He thinks he's won. Then we have him. My dear Arthur, said a predatory glee entering his voice. We have him in a gilded cage. What do you want to do? Isabella's mind was clear. This wasn't just about money for Chloe, though that was paramount. This was about justice. It was about her father's legacy. It was about the look on Conrad Sterling's face. I don't want to sell Arthur. Not in the traditional sense. I want a seat at the table, the one they wouldn't even let me serve. For the rest of the weekend they worked. Arthur's legal team descended upon the case with the ferocity of a wolf pack. They drafted documents, verified the patent's unassailable legal standing, and prepared an ironclad strategy. Meanwhile, Isabella prepared herself. She used the last of her emergency credit card to walk into a high-end boutique. The woman who walked out was not the waitress from Aurelia. She was dressed in a charcoal grey power suit, exquisitely tailored with a simple silk blouse. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. Her shoes were low, sensible heels that made a determined click on the pavement. She looked every inch the powerful heiress she was supposed to be. The clothes were just armor, but they helped her feel the part. She spent Sunday not in a kitchen, but in a library, devouring every article, every financial report, every quarterly earnings call transcript she could find on Sterling Dynamics. She studied Conrad Sterling's business history, his tactics, his wins, and more importantly, his few losses. She learned his language, the language of leverage, of assets, of shareholder value. By Monday morning, she was armed, not just with a patent, but with knowledge. At 9 a.m., sharp on Monday, Arthur Pendleton placed a call to the office of the CEO of Sterling Dynamics. My name is Arthur Pendleton, he announced to the executive assistant. I am the legal counsel for the owner of the Daedalus patent. I understand Mr. Sterling is under the impression that this patent is part of the Rossi Innovations acquisition. I am calling to inform you that this is not the case. The patent is privately owned. The acquisition as it stands is worthless without it. My client is willing to discuss a potential licensing agreement. We are available to meet at 2 o'clock this afternoon. My client will be there in person. The ensuing panic on the other end of the line was, Arthur later reported, a joy to behold. The meeting was confirmed within minutes. As Isabella stood in front of the monolithic Sterling Tower in Midtown, the sun glinting off its glass facade, she took a steadying breath. 2 days ago, she had been serving this man's dinner. Today she was coming to claim his future. She wasn't Isabella the waitress anymore. She was Isabella Rossi, holder of the Daedalus patent, and she was about to call Conrad Sterling's bluff. She walked through the revolving doors, her heels clicking with purpose on the marble floor, and didn't look back. The boardroom at Sterling Dynamics was on the 80th floor, a sterile glass-walled box that offered a godlike view of New York City. It was a room designed to intimidate, to remind any visitor of Conrad Sterling's power and reach. When Isabella and Arthur were shown in, Conrad was already there, flanked by his own team of stern-faced lawyers. Dimitri and Philip were also present, standing nervously by the window, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable. Conrad Sterling stood with his back to them, staring out at the city. He didn't turn around immediately, a classic power play, designed to put his opponents on the back foot. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, his voice a low growl, "I was told you represent the owner of this patent. A last-minute shakedown, is it, trying to squeeze a few extra dollars out of me before the deal closes? It's a bold, if predictable move. My client is not here for a shakedown, Mr. Sterling," Arthur said calmly, taking a seat at the vast mahogany table. "She is here to discuss a partnership." Conrad finally turned a dismissive smirk already forming on his lips. "Oh, is she? And who is this mysterious client who thinks she can—" His words died in his throat. His eyes landed on Isabella. The transformation was so complete that for a split second, pure confusion registered on his face. He saw a poised, elegant woman in a power suit, her expression cool and unreadable. He did not see the waitress. Then his eyes met hers, and recognition dawned. It was a slow, agonizing wave of comprehension that washed over him, draining every last drop of color from his face. His carefully constructed mask of command shattered, replaced by raw, unfiltered shock. His jaw literally dropped. Dimitri and Philip looked as if they had seen a ghost. Philip made a small, choking sound. Isabella savored the silence. It was even more profound than the one in the restaurant. She walked forward and placed her briefcase on the table with a soft click. She did not sit. She stood claiming the position of power at the table. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice, the same one she had used in the restaurant, calm, clear, and cutting. "I believe we've already met." Though the circumstances were different. Conrad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was completely off balance, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the woman in front of him with the servant he had so cruelly mocked. "You," was all he could manage to stammer. "Yes." "Me," Isabella said. She opened her briefcase and slid a single-bound document across the polished table. "That is a certified copy of the Daedalus patent registered in my name. And this," she slid a second document over, "is a summary of the valuation analysis my team has conducted. As you can see, without this patent, your acquisition of Rossi Innovations is essentially the purchase of a few outdated factories and a name. Your investors, who I believe have been promised a revolutionary energy-saving technology, might be disappointed." One of Sterling's lawyers, a sharp-faced woman named Catherine, snatched up the documents and began to read, her eyes flying across the pages. After a moment, she looked up at Sterling and gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. It was an admission of defeat. The documents were ironclad. Conrad finally found his voice, though it was raspy with disbelief. "What do you want? Money, name your price. I'll write you a check and you can disappear." Isabella almost laughed. "You still don't get it, do you? You still think everything and everyone has a price tag. You told me my father was a dreamer, not a businessman." "Perhaps. But he was smart enough to entrust his legacy to someone who would protect it, not sell it to the highest bidder for parts. She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the table. Here are my terms. They are not negotiable. First, the deal for Rossi Innovations will proceed. Sterling Dynamics will acquire the company's assets as planned. Sterling's eyes narrowed, confused. This wasn't what he expected. Second, Isabella continued in exchange for an exclusive perpetual license for the Daedalus patent. Sterling Dynamics will issue a new class of shares equivalent to 20% of the newly merged entity. Those shares will be transferred to me. A gasp went through the room. 20%. It was an astronomical figure, enough to make her one of the largest single shareholders. Third, I will be given a permanent seat on the board of directors of Sterling Dynamics. That's insane. Sterling finally exploded his face, turning a blotchy red. I will not have you in my boardroom. You don't have a choice, Isabella said flatly. Your company's future is tied to a patent that I own. Your stock price will plummet the moment the market learns that your cornerstone technology for the next decade is inaccessible. You've built a beautiful glittering skyscraper, Mr. Sterling, but I own the land it's built on. And I am prepared to evict you. She paused, letting the threat sink in. Oh, and there is one more thing. A fourth term. She looked directly at him, all traces of business disappearing from her face, replaced by a cold, personal fire. You will issue a public, formal apology. Not to me. To the legacy of Leonardo Rossi. You will state that you misjudged the visionary nature of his work, and that you are humbled to be able to carry his innovations into the future. That apology will be printed in the Wall Street Journal at your expense. This was the final devastating blow. It wasn't about money or power. It was about his pride. It was a demand for his complete and utter humiliation on a public stage. Conrad Sterling stared at her, his chest heaving. He was trapped, outmaneuvered. The waitress he had mocked, the stupid cow with the empty eyes, had just backed him into a corner from which there was no escape. He looked at his lawyers, who offered no help. He looked at Dmitri and Philip, who couldn't meet his gaze. He was utterly alone, defeated by a ghost from his past, and the woman he had tried to crush under his heel. Isabella remained standing, her posture unwavering. She had laid her trap perfectly. Now all she had to do was wait for the king to concede the game. You have until 5 o'clock today to sign the agreement, she said, her voice quiet but absolute. After that, I begin entertaining offers from your competitors. She snapped her briefcase shut, gave a slight nod to Arthur, and turned to leave. She didn't need to hear his answer. She could see it in his shattered, disbelieving eyes. She had won. The final hour leading up to the 5 p.m. deadline was the longest of Isabella's life. She sat with Arthur Pendleton in his quiet, wood-panelled office, a world away from the frantic energy of the Sterling Tower. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Neither of them spoke much. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner sounded like a hammer blow counting down the seconds to either a monumental victory or a grueling new phase of their war. Isabella held her phone in a white-knuckled grip, expecting it to ring with a last-ditch lowball offer or a declaration of defiance from Conrad Sterling. But there was only silence. At 4:58 p.m., Arthur's assistant buzzed the intercom. "Mr. Pendleton, a courier from Sterling Dynamics is here." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Arthur gave her a slow, confident smile. "Send him in, Margaret." A uniformed courier entered, carrying a thick leather portfolio. He placed it on the desk, requested Arthur's signature on a digital pad, and then retreated, oblivious to the history-altering document he had just delivered. Arthur slid the portfolio across the desk to Isabella. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, on the final page of the thick agreement, was the signature. It was an angry, jagged slash of ink, the signature of a man signing under duress. But it was there. Conrad Sterling. She sank back into her chair, the tension draining out of her in a single powerful wave, leaving her feeling lightheaded. She looked at Arthur, and for the first time in 2 years, she let tears of relief and vindication well in her eyes. "He did it, Arthur," she whispered. "He had no choice, my dear," Arthur said, his voice full of warmth and pride. "A king with no moves left on the board must eventually concede. You didn't just win a negotiation, Isabella. You executed a perfect checkmate." 2 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning, Isabella walked to a newsstand in her Brooklyn neighborhood. "Wall Street Journal, please," she said to the vendor. Tucked into Section A, page 11, was the full-page notice. The Sterling Dynamics logo was at the top, but the words belonged to her. Reading them on the textured newsprint, amidst the smell of city traffic and roasted nuts, felt more real than any email or press release ever could. Unparalleled genius, visionary nature, profound respect for the legacy of Leonardo Rossi. Each phrase was a balm on a wound she hadn't realized was still so deep. She bought 10 copies. That afternoon, she visited Chloe in the new private clinic in Switzerland, the transition arranged with a speed that still felt surreal. The room was bright and airy, with a view of snow-dusted mountains. Chloe, though still weak, had a new light in her eyes. The constant fear that had shadowed their lives was gone. Isabella placed one of the framed newspaper pages on the bedside table. "What's that?" Chloe asked, her voice a little stronger than the week before. "That," Isabella said, smoothing her sister's hair, "is a receipt. It's proof that Dad's dreams have been paid the respect they were due." Chloe didn't understand the corporate intricacies, but she understood the look on her sister's face, a look of peace. Isabella's first board meeting was a trial by fire. As she walked into the 80th floor boardroom, the silence was palpable. She was the anomaly, the ghost at the feast. The other board members, a collection of men, and one woman in their late 50s and 60s, regarded her with expressions ranging from veiled hostility to cautious curiosity. She was the living embodiment of a corporate crisis they had narrowly averted. Conrad Sterling sat at the head of the table, a thundercloud in a bespoke suit. He ran the first part of the meeting with a brutal, icy efficiency, his voice never rising, his eyes never once straying in her direction. When the agenda item, Integration of Rossi Innovations Portfolio, came up, a tense hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to her. This was her moment. She didn't begin with financials or projections. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Many of you see Rossi Innovations as a collection of physical assets and intellectual property. I see it as a philosophy. My father, Leonardo Rossi, believed that technology should serve humanity, not just the bottom line. He believed in sustainable growth, in treating employees as partners, and in building things that last." She saw a skeptical eyebrow raise from a portly man at the far end of the table, Robert Mills, the chief financial officer. "I'm not talking about charity, Mr. Mills," she said, addressing him directly, showing she'd done her homework. "I'm talking about strategy. The Daedalus patent is a game changer in energy efficiency. Why would we not apply that same principle of eliminating waste to our entire operation, to employee turnover, to our carbon footprint, to inefficient supply chains? The Rossi ethos, as my father called it, isn't about spending more money. It's about creating more value." She laid out a concise 3-point proposal for a pilot program at one of the old Rossi factories, focusing on implementing green technologies and a new employee profit-sharing model. She had data projections and a clear vision. She spoke their language, but with her father's accent. When she finished, the silence was different. It was thoughtful. A younger board member, a tech investor named David Chen, was the first to speak. "The market is shifting, Conrad. ESG initiatives are becoming a major factor in valuation. There might be something to this." Conrad's jaw was tight, but he nodded curtly. "We will table this for review." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was a concession. Isabella had not just claimed her seat, she had used it. Her relationship with Conrad settled into a state of cold professional warfare. They were two opposing magnets forced into proximity, repelling each other with every interaction, yet bound by the corporate structure. He challenged her proposals. She countered with meticulous research. He wielded his authority. She wielded her influence as a major shareholder and the moral authority of her name. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the culture of the meetings began to shift. Her ideas, initially dismissed, started to gain traction. Months passed. One Thursday evening, Isabella was working late in her new office. She had insisted on taking over her father's old executive suite in the original Rossi Innovations building, which Sterling Dynamics now owned. She had kept his old mahogany desk, but modernized the rest, creating a space that was a bridge between the past and the future. A knock came at her door. It was Conrad. He looked out of place without his usual armor of lawyers and assistants. He held a thin file in his hand. "The quarterly projections for the pilot program you initiated," he stated, not waiting for an invitation to enter. "Mills is convinced you're burning money." "The initial outlay is significant," Isabella countered, gesturing for him to take a seat, which he ignored. "But the projections on employee retention and energy savings show us breaking even in 18 months and generating substantial profit by year 3. It's on page 12. He didn't look at the file. "I already read it. I also read the original schematics for Daedalus. Your father's handwritten notes are in the margins." He paused, looking at a framed photo of a smiling Leonardo Rossi on her desk. He wasn't just an engineer. The way he solved the heat dissipation problem. It's elegant. He was an artist. The words hung in the air between them. It was as close to a personal apology, to an admission of his own short-sightedness, as he was capable of giving. "Yes," Isabella said softly. He was. Conrad looked from the photo back to her, and for the first time, his gaze was not hostile or dismissive. It was appraising, acknowledging her as a formidable force in her own right. "The board is approving the expansion of your program tomorrow. I won't be voting against it." He turned and left without another word. Isabella walked to the vast window, looking out at the sprawling city lights. She had fought her way back from invisibility, from the humiliation of a whispered insult in a language she was never meant to understand. She had reclaimed her father's name, secured her sister's future, and was now reshaping the very company that had tried to erase her family's legacy. The waitress uniform was still in a box in her closet, a relic she would never throw away. It was a reminder that true value is never visible on the surface, and that sometimes the most devastating response to mockery is not a clever retort, but a life lived brilliantly. She had won more than a company. She had won back herself. Isabella's story is a powerful reminder that we should never judge a person by their job or their circumstances. The world tried to tell her she was just a waitress, someone invisible and powerless, but inside her was a legacy of genius, a core of unbreakable dignity, and a brilliant strategic mind. Conrad Sterling, a man who had everything learned the hard way, that true power isn't about wealth or status. It's about character and respect. This story isn't just about an epic comeback. It's about the hidden potential that lies within all of us, waiting for its moment. It's a testament to the idea that a person's worth is not defined by the apron they wear, but by the strength and intelligence they carry within. If this story of resilience, intelligence, and poetic justice moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story that will inspire and captivate you. What part of Isabella's journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.